Hey guys, I am back and I am super excited because I have a special guest in the building. My good friend Danny. If you go back into my live, he was a guest on the show about 5 years ago in 2020 during the pandemic. Him and a very good friend of mine named Maricela, and we were talking about men's issue, mental health. And I'm glad to have him back. And before I introduce him, I just want to let you guys know he makes this amazing body butter. I have it right here. Do you see the jar right here? It is delicious. I not only have one, I have actually two. He makes these from scratch in his lab, and he makes different scents. He has like island body butter is what he's doing now, and he has different scents as well. If you look below, you can see his IG. So you can go on his IG and hit him up. Sorry, guys. So Danny's here. Go ahead. You want to say hi to the audience?
Hey, how's it going, everybody?
Buddy's going good. How are you?
I'm doing good.
It's nice.
Doing good.
It's nice to have you back.
It's nice to be back. It really is.
5 years is a
Thanks
long.
for having me.
5 years is a long time. It's too long to be gone.
Yeah, 5 years. A lot can happen in 5 years. Time is going by quickly. So kind of gotta wake up and realize in the moment. But 5 years has been a long time. So much has happened in 5 years.
I know it was the pandemic. It was COVID. I think you
Yeah.
you called in. Hopefully one day Danny won't be so shy and he'll come on camera. But we're thankful for what we'll get. And yeah, we were in COVID and we were quarantined, and it was a really scary time. But we made it
Really
through.
was.
We made it
Yeah.
through by the grace of God, and hopefully we're stronger for it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, so much has happened since then in so many people's lives. Lots of loss, a few gains here and there, awakening of realizing of our mental health and navigating and trying to figure out ways to protect ourselves. Not only physically, but emotionally, spiritually, mentally, so that we can be the best versions of ourselves. And I think a lot of people have come to that realization, especially a lot of young people. So it's a good sign. It's a blessing in disguise. What has happened in the last 5 years, and what we look forward to in the future.
So, what is it that you think that the younger generation can do to protect their mental health? Because we know a lot of social media, how maybe damaging it could be. They just have instant access to everything globally, internationally, the good, the bad, and the ugly. What advice do you think you would have on younger people and maybe the effects with the internet, how damaging that may be for their mental health?
So I think for advice, I think number one, you have to want to become a better person. Right? We don't just do something without purpose. And so I think what's happened in the last 5 years, and probably the last 20 years, when we look at people in general and we look at the different types of people, and where people come from and who they are, I think there's been this big shift just in life in general, where people are starting to embrace who they are, and their culture and where they come from. And you see now a higher level of acceptance of embracing individuals, diversity, and whatnot. So I think that has happened as well, where people are just starting to feel confident about themselves and who they are. The second part of that too is that in that self-discovery, people are also looking at the inside of what shaped what made them become the individual that they are. They're looking within their own families. They're trying to figure out personalities of the ancestors that came before them, their parents, how they were raised, this and that. That's how they shape the individuals that they become. So I think in the last 5 years, because of COVID was sort of like the vacancy of being able to identify and self-discover by being at home and having to be still and know where to go and no socialization. And so I think people have, spent the time to look within to figure out who they are. I also think that people, and you see it on social media, people are, taking different approaches in life. You see people becoming nomads, living across the world. Some people leaving the United States. Some people, choosing to settle in remote areas and start life all over again and just truly disconnect. I think the term is called something like living off the grid, so to speak. So I think that just has opened the floodgates for people to figure out who they are and whatnot and who they become. And so, but again, the biggest piece is that you have to want to become a different person.
I mean,
in my case, I left home at the age of 26. I had finished my college education, so I thought, and I received my bachelor's degree in 2010 and 2011. I had always wanted to come to Florida and move and, start over. And I did that, came down here in 2011, stayed with relatives for a short period of time, went to school, started to become my own. And I don't think I would have evolved into a different human being had I not done that. Had I stayed home, with my parents and the security of that home or whatever, I don't think I would have had an opportunity for myself to evolve. And so doing that actually, started to help me look outside of myself and look at my surroundings and look at my family and then figure out who am I, and then who are they?
Self-awareness is definitely important. So, according to the Cleveland Clinic, in an online survey among approximately 1,000 U.S. males, 18 years and older, Cleveland Clinic found that 77% of men report their stress level has increased as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. 59% of the men have felt isolated during the pandemic, and nearly half, 45% of the men, said their emotional and mental health has worsened since then. Was that something that you would agree with?
Absolutely. With those statistics, I think, again, the pandemic was the opportunity, the time for people to look inside themselves. Obviously, we know that during the pandemic, other things occurred, racial reckoning within the country,
Oh, yes.
with very high controversial political leaders and figures, and we just really just started to see the division.
Wasn't that crazy? I remember being in New York and all of New York was like on fire, burning down. Wasn't that? I was like, are we back in the 60s? It was like the pandemic and then everything was on fire. It was madness, right?
Yeah, it was sadness and everything. And so it was just a lot of ugly truths coming to the surface with a lot of different things. Within the pandemic, people really started to see they could not function without, social interaction. They could not function without this, without that. And then, of course, like I said, the racial reckoning, the deep-rooted racism that lives in America, that came to the surface. And then, loved ones started passing away, by way of COVID or whatever. So you had a lot of people,
grieving,
and grieving. And so all of that bottled up into one, all of those different emotions, I think that forced people to look at themselves in a different kind of way and then, become more self-aware. But again, there's a lot of people that took the necessary steps to go seek therapists to deal with all of those sort of regurgitating thoughts and feelings and emotions. And so I think that was the biggest thing that took place. And so now I think, a lot of people that have done therapy, I know I've done it myself, is that we're looking and we're tracing, where did these emotions, where did these thoughts come from? Where did these personality traits, where did they come from? And the one place that you can always look is within and look at your life and your history and your family and look, okay, that's where it came from. Now I see, now I made the connection. And so this is what I need to do going forward to become a better person. Don't repeat these same patterns, you know what I mean? And so I think that's the biggest thing that has come out. So in terms of advice we mentioned earlier is to, number one, have a desire, and number two, to look within inside yourselves and just take your time and identify the pieces and go forward from there. And don't be afraid and ashamed to say, I need to heal,
Yes, so I'm looking at something online saying, so how to support men with their mental health. It says normalize conversations by sharing your experience, encourage them when they share, provide a safe place for them to share, help raise awareness on men and mental health, even if they refuse to ask them twice, acknowledge if they are in a difficult situation, and recognize any change in their behavior and their attitude.
Right.
So I think we as women, as a woman, we always run our mouth, love to talk, have support. I mean, I would get texts all day. Hey girl, how you doing? What'd you do today? Are you okay? Everything okay? Hey girl, good morning, good night. I love you. I miss you. We get that we bombard each other with emotions. And I think men maybe don't have as much support as women get, you know? And I
Well,
think
yeah, I think that too. But I also think there's a lot of generational things, trauma that's been passed on from generation to generation, and expectation of how to be. And I think,
do you find that
again,
with do you think that's with all men that have trauma, or or is that more with men of color?
I would say men of color is, more applicable.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I think too, the harder the life our ancestors had it, I think the harder it is to kind of break away and, show love, show affection, and this and that. One of the things that I've noticed is like in other cultures, particularly European cultures, how men are a little bit more affectionate with, other men in terms of, father and son. And I think that just kind of makes it makes the men a little bit better. They're able to emotionally connect a little bit better with women and whatnot. Where you see other cultures, like men, especially cultures of men of color, where affection is not shown or anything like that. And I think that that just harbors unhealthy characteristics and traits and emotions. So that's the biggest thing. I think men of color. So I think again, looking back, there needs to be a breakdown of the generational trauma and how it's connected to the men today and how men thrive, especially with mental health. One of the things I will say that I think has been awesome, I know actor Lamont Rucker and Taraji P. Henson, they established a mental health men's of color tour that took place in the last 5 years. I can't think off the top of my name, but they were going city to city and having mental health talks with black men of color and being able to heal all of the things that our ancestors harbored from one generation to the next down to ourselves are some of the most unhealthiest traits, especially when it comes to being emotionally connected to society and how we raise, strong, but, men, but also, raising that it's okay to have down moments. How do you recover? How do you deal? It's okay to feel, right? It's okay to feel those emotions. You don't always have to, be like, oh, be all tough and be a man and this and that. It's okay if you have an emotional breakdown. How do you heal from that? You can't harbor in those negative emotions and sadness inside of you, and then it just suppresses itself inside of you, and it yields maybe sometimes the worst characteristic, but because you're holding in, you're not releasing it and getting it.
But I think that's something that boys are taught as a child. Don't cry, stick it. Don't be a baby, don't be a crybaby. Be a man, be tough. It does say that black and white men can experience trauma, but the nature and the impact can differ due to a variety of factors, including systematic racism and historical trauma. Black men are disproportionately affected by violence, community trauma, leading to higher rates of PTSD and mental health challenges. Where white men may experience trauma related to combat, accidents, or personal experience, but systematic factors and historical trauma is definitely higher issue for Black men.
Yeah, and definitely for sure. I mean, and you mentioned some of the other things with white men. war, those kinds of things. That whole structure of the man of the household, wife, the traditional gender roles and whatnot. That's part of it as well. So I think it's just breaking down, that structures and how we get to this part or whatever. And I think that younger people now are like, no, we're a team. Um, let's work this together, and because things have changed. Women today are career women. Women today have more leadership. They have a lot more say, and so that's not going to change. So as a man and as a team, coming together, a family, we have to make a compromise, and we have to accept each other's strengths and realize that we're creating a great team and we're creating a greater good of human beings, but we have to be willing to listen and compromise and accept and respect. So I think that's the biggest thing. And so with men of color, we might have the two additional steps that we have to do to get to our point. We got to heal ourselves, and we got to change the narrative of how we show love to one another, to our young boys and whatnot. We have to get past that, and then we can, again, start to begin to heal, and change those behaviors.
So they say, when you educate a girl, you educate the world, right? So there has been a significant decline in the patriarchal structure of the family. Do you think that mental health has a reason that the male figure is declining or missing from the family now? Or is it because of changing gender roles?
I think obviously there's a change in gender roles, but I don't think that this family structure, I think it's changed because of tradition is not what it used to be when you talk about the family structure. In the past, it was a two-parent household, if lucky. The man worked, the wife stayed at home, took care of the kids, cooked, cleaned, that kind of thing. And then now today, 2025, if there is family structure, both parents work. Some have it more blessed than others where they have a nanny, but both parents work, both bring in income, and unfortunately, because of the cost of living, for that family structure to sustain financially, both parents have to work and whatnot. And so now that that's the norm, then there's the other part emotionally. How does the man feel like the man of the house, and how does the woman feel like the woman of the household? How do we balance the power structure of the family dynamic? And so that's still something that's a challenge, I think, for a lot of people still.
Well, it says,
and then you still have
it says,
the single parent household where things are just completely different. One income, one person leading the way, and either absentee mother or absentee father, or a two parents that co-parent well together. The dynamic is just so different. So
I think while some may view the decline of the patriarchal family a positive steps towards gender equality and social justice, others express concerns about the potential for social instability and the erosion of traditional values. Some studies suggest that the decline of the patriarchal norms may lead to a decrease in the family size and a rise in the family breakdown. However, other research indicates that the world without a patriarchal family would be one that everyone enjoys greater freedom, dignity, and equality. It's interesting.
yeah, it definitely is.
They blame it on feminism. Women want to be fat. I want to go out and work. I want to vote. I want to drive my car. I want to work. Right? Feminist movement. And then the woman all of a sudden says, well, you don't open up the car door for me. Right? So do you want to go out and pay as a woman, as a female? Do you want to go out and pay the bills and make the bacon? Or do you want the man to be chauvinistic and open up the car door and open up? It's hard to have both. So I think our roles started to cross. And then you have women going in the workforce, and then you had some men be stay-at-home dads. And I'm not against either. I'm just whatever works for you. Whatever works for you. That works.
Right. I think the thing is that if it's, talking about that scenario and that situation, the loss of the man in the household and raising up the next generation of kid, I think the focus and the concern, has been too much on the traditional parental roles. I think most of the concerns, like, can we raise the next set of considerate individual children growing into adults? I think that's where the focus should be. And I think that a lot of couples that are out there, whether you're gay, straight, particularly with the gays, their approach is more, let's raise a well-rounded, considerate individual, a respectful individual, a humane individual. And I think people think that to raise that kind of person, there's a requirement to have a man and a woman in the household. And I think that there's an opportunity to be able to derive and bring in, teach a kid those wonderful traits. But again, the person doing the raising has to be completely whole to be able to do that, regardless if it's a single parent, a single man, or a single woman, or a gay couple or a straight couple. The individuals have to be whole to be able to raise those kind of individuals.
Yeah, I agree with that absolutely 100%. I know some single dads out there that done like amazing. It's not about, oh, you have to be a woman to raise a kid, or a single man. I've seen single men do great jobs raising their kids, but I know you talked about self-awareness, self-knowledge. Man, you recently just took a trip to Honduras. I'd love to hear about that. How do you feel that helped your growth in any way going down there?
So Honduras was great. So this was my first time going to
Your
Honduras. So
family.
I
I'm
have
sorry. Let's give the audience a background about you. Your family's from there, correct?
yeah. So
Okay.
I've known this for majority of my life, as much as I've been, able to be cognitive of that. My family on my mother's side of the family were Hispanic Caribbean individuals. So my grandmother on my mother's side was born, and this is something that I learned on the trip. She was born in British Honduras, and for those that don't know, British Honduras is now called the country of Belize. But back in the 1950s and 40s, and before that, British Honduras was called, I'm sorry, Belize was called British Honduras. Then there's Spanish Honduras, which is what everyone knows Honduras to be, that you see now on the map. My grandfather, which is my mother's father, he was born there, and then he moved to Belize. My grandmother, when she was born in British Honduras, aka Belize, she moved to Honduras, Spanish Honduras. So that was the migration. So one was born in one country, one was born in the other, and they basically flipped in terms of where they grew up. So went to Honduras for the first time. I had never been. My grand aunt, which is my grandmother's youngest sister, the youngest child of the family, she took us, and it was about 18 of us, cousins, second cousins. We all went. We got a family history heritage tour of Honduras, and so I had started over the last 20 years to find out more about my family, my grandmothers and uncles, and my great grandmother, who I did meet, and was babysat by her back in the day in New York.
And which city were you? Which city were you in Honduras?
I was in La Ceiba, Honduras, which is on the mainland, and then I went to Rotan, which is on the island of one of the Bay Islands in Honduras.
Mm-hmm.
So went there, saw the location of where they grew up in La Ceiba, Honduras, before they moved to the United States, and I actually have artifacts of when some of my relatives came to New York. They came on the SS Manifesto to New York City when they finally left Honduras, and so I got the full history. My great grandmother raising up her kids and moving to the States and sending money back to bring all the other kids up to New York City for equality and a better life. And so I got to learn all of that. The ugly side of that I learned is some of the family dynamics, which I had already known, but I got more in depth and learning about different members of the family. So I'm well aware of my grandaunt named Olive. When she came to New York, she was pregnant. She got pregnant with her third child and died during childbirth in 1960 in the Women's Hospital in Harlem. The baby split her body open when it was, when she was in labor, and it ruptured her, and then she died, basically hemorrhaged. And so I learned about that, which I had already known. I had found her gravesite about 4 years ago during the pandemic, and started to bring closure to figure out who was this woman. And so learned more about, some of the things about my grandmoms and uncles, their marriages that failed, and whatnot. And so that was eye opening. And I think for me is, learning about their personality and this and that, and the good and the bad and ugly, and right, we learn a lot from the good, but we also learn a lot from the ugly things about our family. And I definitely learned a lot about that. And so my cousins, who are second cousins, that we're all from the same generation, born in the 80s or the 70s, that we kind of make a vow not to repeat some of those ugly truths that existed within our family. We talk about favoritism, we talk about religion, we talk about marriages and those kinds of things, and abuse and whatnot. A lot of that was experienced in my mom's family, especially in the grands or whatever, and abandonment and all of those ugly traits. So we learned all of that, and I think a lot of us are trying not to repeat some of those ugly cycles that they experience and whatnot. And of course, a lot of that probably has to do with racism and favoritism and trying to strive for that, what's called the American dream. Mm-hmm. All of that, this baggage that comes with it. And so it can show up in ugly ways, and that's what happened in my family. My grandma being the youngest, being the favorite, and favorite over her other siblings, and it, shaped who she is. And now she doesn't have a lot of friends of color or whatever. And, she's a Republican and this and that. And so, and she's religious, claims to be a religious person or whatever. And so a lot of her favoritism shows up in her personality, how she treats other members of the family. She's improved, but it's just that I learned a lot of that on the trip.
I love how you had an opportunity to go back. My favorite movie is Sankofa. You've been to my house. I had the whole movie night and everything, and painted T-shirts for you guys and everything. And part of Sankofa is you cannot know where you're going to go forward unless you look back and face your past. So that was almost like a rebirth experience for you to go back, see where your family was at, where they're from. Look at the DNA, look at the struggles, look at the opportunity that maybe was and was not provided with them when they came to America, what obstacles they have to overcome. And then even with, you talk about mental health again, some things with bipolar, anxiety, depression, a lot of those things are like clinical. We have things with the environment that are going to make you depressed. Of course, you lose your job. Right now, we're heading to a recession. So there are things that are not out of our control, right? Like watching the news or whatever. But when you're talking about in your DNA, mental health, there are things that are just running your family history. Right. So I think this look back, this Sankofa bird that goes and looks back, and I felt like that was an opportunity that you had to do, which I think was really amazing. Did you see any traits of like mental health that you could trace when in Honduras that maybe you weren't aware of, or to be able to connect the dots? Like my family, my mother's family's from Jamaica. I did a whole family tree, and I was surprised to see that there was two aunts that were committed suicide, and they jumped off a building in Harlem, and I was able to pull up their death certificates at a mental hospital in Harlem. And I was very confused because I was like, why don't you just go to Harlem Hospital around the corner? Why did you drive over the bridge to mental hospital? Because that meant it was a death by suicide. So it made me think like, wow, I have this, depression in the family. And it was such knowledge of self is so powerful. You know where you came from, you can identify things, and maybe try to want to help yourself because you understand things a little better. Did you have any enlightenment like that on your journey?
Yeah, of course. So I was saying earlier, I think what I discovered in my family, that there was, and there's a lot of that too to this day. You and I were talking about, the Diddy trial. And I don't want to get into it, but we talked about Cassie, one chasing stardom and fame and fortune. That was a lot in my mom's family. My grandmother wanting to come to my great grandmother wanting to come into the United States to better, the life for her and her kids. Yes, that's the good side. She wanted everybody here. She wanted everyone to take advantage, especially my mom's cousins that are way older than her, the last sort of generation that was born in Honduras. She wanted them to take advantage of the American school system. And this is in the 1940s, 1950s. And so, but what I learned, what I mentioned earlier about favoritism and dysfunction, family dynamics, I learned a lot of that. My great grandmother was born to a Honduran mother and a Jamaican father, and was in British Honduras. And she had one brother, and I believe they had the same parents. And the mother didn't favored her brother because her brother apparently was, I don't know if he might have been light skinned or whatever. And my great grandmother was dark skinned. And so the mother favored the brother over her a little bit more.
Oh, so you're talking about the colorism that they were suffering from on the island, and one was being treated differently than the other.
Exactly.
Yeah, sad. That still goes on.
Yeah, we had a severe colorism issue, and so my great grandmother was treated differently, and then she got pregnant at 16. And my great grandmother, I would imagine she carried a lot of pain too, because out of the 6 kids that she had, which included my grandmother, she ended up actually having 13 total pregnancies. So there was 50% of the pregnancies that were miscarriages that didn't make. And so her first child, my Uncle Cliff, and I have to put in a plug here. I have to say rest in peace to my Uncle Cliff's son, Cliff Jr. He just passed away a couple of days ago unexpectedly. But Cliff, he was born, my great grandmother gave birth to him at 15. And I think, and this is just me, because he was such a character when I was a kid growing up, such a character. He would tell people lies. He was chasing fame and stardom and whatnot. He wanted to be famous, and he was almost like a child that was born out of shame. But he was born. He was just had so much dysfunction within him. Like I said, he was trying to chase fame or whatever, and he actually lost contact with my great grandmother, which was his mother, and he left Honduras and went to the United States, but my great grandmother couldn't find him. And so that was a big thing. And so he didn't want, I don't know what was wrong with him, but he was just a character in the head, a mental character, always trying to live in the fast lane, trying to make quick money or whatever. And I think he might have inherited a little of that from his father, which is my great grandfather. My great grandmother, my great grandfather were married. They were well off. They had servants. They had businesses. And then my great grandfather got caught into gambling and lost the business that he had. And
now is this that's in Honduras, or is that up here?
This is in Honduras,
okay.
British Honduras. He lost all those things, and so what split my great grandmother and my great grandfather together, because he lost the business, it failed the marriage, and that's what brought her to La Ceiba, Honduras, Spanish Honduras. She heard about a food company, American food company that was hiring, and so she moved all of her kids and whatnot and moved to La Ceiba, Honduras, and worked there and started life all over again. But at that point, her first child, Cliff, he had left the United States, and she always wondered where he went. And, obviously at that time, we had no social media. All we had was telegrams and that kind of stuff or whatever. No phones, all that stuff. And so when she's, obviously at that time when the word got out that, there's American dream in the United States, and she decided to leave, she always vowed to look for Cliff. So she drove across the United States looking for him. And it wasn't until she found out that her other son, my Uncle Bob, he actually found Uncle Cliff and found him in New York, and she was able to reunite with him. But so much time had passed by then that all the other siblings came to the States, and my grandaunt, being the youngest, she was born, and this is where the colorism and favoritism show up. She has a different father than the rest of her siblings. And when she was born like a model. She was tall. She had very pretty skin. She had a very pretty face, very pretty hair, even though she was dark skinned. And she was highly favored amongst all her other siblings. And so my great grandmother making a mistake because she wasn't the favorite child growing up. She turned that into treating her youngest daughter as the favorite child for everything. And that's what caused division within the family and conflict and personality dislike between some of the siblings. Even though they were family, yes, they probably loved each other, but there was a sort of resentment that was built in between certain members of the family. And so my grandaunt, Aunt Sadie, got treated. She was the first to sort of go to college of her generation. She didn't have to work. She had servants. She got to travel around the world and this and that because she was so pretty and this and that. And so that caused resentment between the siblings. And so I think that's what I took away the most, that there was a lot of that was carried over into the other siblings and them trying to find their way into life. And of course, when you do that, you're trying to find your way. You bring in, you can tend to bring in the wrong child into your life, trying to fill that void or whatever of which you didn't get from my great grandmother. So I think that happened a lot.
So what do you think? So being that, we do see that with men of color, that mental health is on the rise, and that you were able to go back to Honduras, get some knowledge of self, and come back. Is there anything that you do to detox any of the noises in your head or the negativity? Because we do live, society that we live in, one is very stressful and it can be very negative. What do you do as a man of color, to kind of de-stress or detox your mind, body, and soul?
Well, I think the first thing that at least what I do, and this is self awareness, and this is what I've embedded and recognized. I can be whoever I want to be that I feel comfortable with. I do not need to chase a societal standard of how I should be as a man of color. And this is something that I learned too on my father's side of the family. They're all living in New York City till this day. And they have a very their life is very, I don't want to say sheltered, but it's very one dimensional with them, whatever. Like, we just had a short little reunion last month at my parents' house in Maryland, to do my grandmother's tree
Oh
planting.
yeah, that was nice. That was nice. You said every time someone passes away, you plant a tree. I like that.
Yeah.
Is that spiritual?
So
Is that something spiritual that they do in Honduras or just in your family?
No, that's something that we decided my parents wanted to start doing, whatever. Since both of my grandparents passed in the same year in 2023, my mom's dad passed in 2023 in the spring, and then my grandmother, my dad's mom, she passed in the fall of 2023. And so I think that was something that they decided they want to do, which I think is nice, is to plant a tree. But what I'll say with my dad's family, because my dad's family, they're African Americans from South Carolina, and that's a whole nother carried trauma, that's been brought into the family. I actually learned that my grandfather was an alcoholic. He worked in construction and he only obtained like a 7th or 6th grade education or whatever. He passed in 1993 when I was about 7 years old. But I just remember him being very isolated, being in the apartment on the Grand Concourse in the Bronx and whatnot, and him not being super social and that kind of thing or whatever. And so my grandmother passed and we went to bury her, to the gravesite where he was at. It kind of brought some closure to kind of know who he was a little bit. But because he was such a certain way, I think my dad's family, they were more timid or whatever. Even so this day, they're very sheltered kind of individuals. Everything is about church, and that kind of thing, and group text with prayers and stuff, which is nice. But there's no self discovery, and I think in my dad's side of the family. So when I went up for my grandmother's tree planting, they're very one dimensional. They watch basketball, um, and that's their focal point. That's what unites everyone together. Nothing else. Church and food, and that's about it. I feel like there's no self discovery on wanting to live a very full life or whatever. So,
Would you think like
would,
exercise or meditation or yoga or just diet? Maybe.
yeah,
I think certain foods we eat probably. You know how they say you
yeah,
are what you eat. Certain foods could
yeah,
hold on to maybe
yeah,
making you feel more. What's the word? Lethargic, maybe less
yeah,
energy, depression.
yeah. So I'm a little bit. I like to think myself as the black sheep, but in a good way. I like to explore other cultures. They're more sheltered and one dimensional. They love them some southern food or whatever. Or
Who doesn't love? Come on, Danny. Who doesn't love Southern food? I love me
I
some
love
fried
southern food,
chicken
but
and yams and
not
mac
every
and
single
cheese.
day though.
Not every day, yeah.
That's every single day. That's not good for me. And you know how it is in New York. You go down the street, you get your $5 shrimp fried rice and chicken
Oh,
wings from the
Chinese. That's the
Chinese
worst. They
place.
got all the MSG. You know,
Yeah,
that's the
you go
worst.
down, you go to the bodega, you get, soda pop, you get, or you go to a Blimpie spot, or you get a sandwich, or you go to the Puerto Rican spot, you get a breakfast and stuff. And so, they're still living in New York City in the Bronx, and I feel like for me, like I can't live like that. I've got to see other cultures. I got to feel other cultures. I got to experience other cultures and whatnot. So, me with this sort of worldly perspective to protect my mental health and peace is that I just accept everybody for who they are and try to appreciate and like them for the great things that they are, whatever. And in the past, I have done yoga. I did, like I said, I did go see a wellness coach, this and that. And I look at other cultures, and I just try to be optimistic and open minded, and learn about their cultures and see how I can become a better person and infuse that. So I'm very, very Renaissance and very, very, you know, um, try to be multi-dimensional in that perspective.
Yeah, that's good. I think everyone was, surprised when to hear that when Twitch had passed away. He was the he worked on the Ellen DeGeneres show. Was he her
Yeah,
DJ? Was he the DJ?
I think so. Yeah, he
Yeah,
was the DJ.
he was always smiling, dancing. Had a family, had a wife, had kids, and my mom was a healthcare professional, and she said sometimes when people are suicidal before they make the decision to take their end their life, they become very joyous, happy, joyous, laughing, smiling, kind of like Robin Williams, happy because they made a plan in their head that I'm gonna end my life, so I'm happy with my decision because we always saw him smiling, laughing, dancing, and I think people were surprised when he finally did commit suicide. What signs would you say, for a man of color who's in crisis? Like I didn't grow up with brothers, and my dad was not. I had my dad in my life, but I didn't live in the house with him. So I was grew up with a lot of female energy, So I don't know what is it that what are the signs to look for in a man of color that's in crisis? Would you say to look for?
I mean, it's very, very hard to tell because there's the stigma of got to be tough, got to be this. But I think the number one sign is distance. If you have a friend or a man of color and they are just completely ghosted in the environment that they're in and they're not reaching out, there's always a sign to be of
You
concern.
mean if they're quiet? You mean if they're quiet?
If they isolated themselves,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Isolation.
or if they're in a
Well, I think
space,
it's the same with women too, men or women.
yeah, if they're in a space and they just they're not smiling or they feel like they don't fit in or whatever, I think that could be a sign or whatever. But anyone that
Well, that was the
somebody
difference.
just
That was the
says,
thing with Twitch, right? He was outgoing, laughing, working, dancing, like everything on the outside just seemed perfect. But we don't know his background
yeah,
financially.
I
We don't know
think
if he had financial problems. That was the same thing with Chris Lighty. Chris Light. Are you familiar with his story?
A little bit.
Yeah, he brokered the vitamin water deal with 50 Cent, and he was married, and supposedly he had died from suicide. And I think 50 Cent tried to reopen the investigation, and people were like, he had money, he was a millionaire, he was popular, he was this, that, and then just one day he pulled the trigger, and it's very confusing when on the outside you appear to look like you have everything together.
Yeah, I think it's just if you start to see self isolation and whatnot, and they try to disguise it as alone time or whatever. It's very hard, Allison, to really make that distinction to see if they're in crisis. It's very hard because some people are self sufficient in self isolation, and some people are not. So how do you know which if the person is self isolating because they're suicidal or they're self isolating because they know they need that break from people? It's
Do
very,
you
very
feel
difficult
like
to
do you feel like
distinguish.
women should like check in, like do a like a wellness check, right? We've been in those situations, right, Danny, where we sat in crisis mode, like, hey, there's a loved one, should we do a wellness check? Should we do a wellness visit? Should we do a call? And you sometimes those wellness checks, it's too late. By the time
Right.
we stop to say, hey, this person's they're already they're already over the cliff,
Right.
you know?
Right. Right. No, wellness checks absolutely for sure. But there has to be more done to create safe spaces for men of color. And I think there's, like I said, mentioned earlier, I think there's a few people leading the way. Taraji P. Henson and Von Rucker had this tour called Just Heal for Black men. And then also, I think Alonzo Mourning just had an event recently last weekend for men's health. So I think we just have to create more safe spaces and say to Black men it's okay, you know. And so I think also too, there's Black women out there that encourage that as well. I've seen stuff online where Black women have encouraged Black men to love and show affection to their young kings or whatever as you want to call it and whatnot. So I think that it does exist. It just needs to be normalized a little bit more, and it needs to be a little bit more abundant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know we've been talking about, we like I said, it's been 5 years since we talked about mental health and how like so much has changed. Do you feel like things are improving? Are they getting better? Are they getting worse? Or just more with the awareness? There's more awareness about it? Or what do you think?
I think it's a slow moving needle. I really do because you see, there's people that are doing the work and are moving forward in life, and there's a whole bunch that need the work and things are falling backwards or things are coming to the surface where people are saying, "Oh yeah, this one needs to go heal themselves or whatever." So it's a slow moving needle. I don't think it touches everyone just yet. There's a part of me that thinks that nothing is going to change because of the generations. That baby boomer generation is very, very, very hardened. And so for them to do the work, to try to heal, to inspire the next generation, so the likelihood of that happening is slim to none. And so I think that's what's making the needle move slower is Black men of color healing from how they were raised. If there was any kind of toxicity in how they were raised, Black men healing from that. It takes a lot of self-awareness to make that actually happen. So I think, like I said, there's a lot of men that are doing that work now, and women too. And there's a lot of people that still need to do that work, but because of the fear of trying to change, because based on how they're raised, that's the prevention barrier that's in the way of making that happen. So, but it's a slow moving needle. It really is.
Yeah, well, it was really great having you on today and hearing about your trip and everything. And do you have any additional advice for any of the youth listening in on this call today?
All I can say is find love, find what makes you happy, and be self aware and do what makes you happy and be okay with it of whatever it is that you want to be or how you want to live your life. Be okay with it. Just as long reminder to make sure you're creating contributing to a greater good of society and,
Exactly.
and creating to evolution of yourself, so that when you get older, that you can look back and say, I enjoyed my life or whatever. I love my life.
Exactly.
And so just be completely holistic and whole in your approach, and make the best of it, and do not let anybody change your evolution.
So you're saying live with purpose. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And we as women, and as we as women, I'm learning too to check in, for us to do our own check in. Tell me a little bit. Tell me a little bit about your Tell me a little bit about your body butter, where people can get it, how you make it. You make this from scratch. Can they order it online? Tell us a little bit about it.
So the body butter, and I'll try to make it short to wrap this up. So my body butter journey actually started in 2015. So I, went through a period, and like many period actually, because I'm, an athlete. I've been an athlete all my life, and so I've spent a lot of time in the sun. And so I've always tried to find the best, cosmetic products for my skin. I sweat a lot from exercise and stuff. I'm always outside in the sun and this and that, and I have very noticeable skin complexion where, people can tell I take care of it and whatnot. And so in 2015, I had gotten into running in 2013, so 2 years of running, and I was like, I've got to find a product where it can sustain my skin, and the heat and the sweat, whether it's thick or not. I've got to supply that. So I actually saw somebody online make their own body butter. And I didn't realize at that time I was, going through a transitioning phase where I was very plant-based friendly and this and that. I had done that for a couple of years. And so I said, let me start making my own body butter. So through trial and error for the last 10 years, I was making it. And
has it been 10 years? Has it been 10 years since you've been doing it now?
It's been 10 years since I started making it. And, now in the last year or two, I've gotten to a point where I've formalized it to a perfect formula where I can, use it and be comfortable and put it out there. And so the last 10 years, I've been making my own body butter, adding different oils, aloe and that kind of stuff, and different healthy products that are chemical free. And so the last 2 years, or actually more than 2 years, I've gotten to a point where, okay, I've got a correct recipe, I've got a correct formula, I know how to keep everything the same, but just change the scent. And so it has brought what I have today. So my product is called Skin Body Batter, but the name of the actual product is called Body Butter, and it all depends on the scent. So I try to move in with the seasons. So I try to make a scent that goes with the season. So right now we're coming into summer, and I live in Florida. And so this scent that I currently have that's available is called Island Rum Punch Body Butter. And this was actually a name inspired by Carol's daughter that used to have a body butter many, many years ago. And so it's all natural. African shea butter. It's got all the different oils, grapeseed oil, olive oil, coconut oil. It's got honey, it's got vanilla, it's got aloe, vegetable glycerin, rose water, coconut water, pineapple juice, and whatnot. And it doesn't curdle. And it's all whipped into one scent. And I add my essential oils. It's got tree tea oil, vitamin E oil. And you can find me on my Instagram, Dan_Danny, DANNY_Daniel, DANEIEL. _Kev, you'll see my body butter on there, and I take orders through DM, Cash App, Zelle, Square, Venmo, and whatnot, and I ship them priority USPS shipping if you live, within the country. And so I would say get your orders quick, because I tend to go fast with the orders. People will send me their DM requests. I just sold 4 in one day, and so I'm already getting close to the 25% sold mark. Next week I'll probably be selling them at a picnic and whatnot. So I say get your orders today. And again, my Instagram page is Dan, DAN_DANY_DANIEL_KDB. You can find my product on there.
And I see you had a Bali Lime Papaya, or Ocean Breeze, a Sweet Rain, and a Mango Madness. I have your Instagram up so everyone can see.
Yeah, yeah. So find me on Instagram. I do 1 cent per season. So we're in summer, so island one purchase a cent. When we get into the fall and Christmas, we have a holiday cent, and then in the spring we have a generic um, oatmeal scent, and then the spring, like real spring, we have our Bali spring scent, which has that forest kind of oceans kind of smelling kind of scent, fresh, clean scent. So
I have my body
follow me on
butter right
Instagram.
here, guys. I've been using it for years. I'm getting ready to make another order. And I do ship some to Jamaica, to my family in Jamaica, my friends in New York. And it's creamy, but it's not too thick. But I just love the smell. He did a rum punch or smell or something, and it is just good. I just love anything, all natural for your body. Of course, it's great. And what I'm going to do, guys, his Instagram, you could DM him. I'm going to leave it at the top of the chat. I'm going to pin it at the top of the chat so anybody watching this, they can see it. Thanks for being the sponsor for today, Danny. It's always been great. You're a wealth of knowledge. I love how much work you do in the community. And thank you for supporting the Safari Spice Show. Absolutely. It's great to be on, and I watch you just about as much as I can, or whatever. And so I always enjoy our camaraderie and sharing of knowledge and thoughtfulness and thinking things through to have better understanding of, just life in general. So thank you for having me. Yeah, no problem. Hopefully, it won't be another 5 years before we do it again. Yeah, yeah. Well, we'll never run out of things to talk about. So I'm sure something structured will come up again that we can chat on a future episode. Yes, yes. And there's also, suicide prevention hotline. If anybody's ever in crisis, help is available. You could text 988 help or call 988. They also have a chat and a website as well, 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. If anybody's in help, always reach out. Okay, Danny. We'll talk soon. All right. Thanks a lot for coming on. Weekend. You too. All right. Bye, guys. Bye. Mhm.